It was just after 10 a.m. on an ordinary Thursday in Midtown Manhattan. A few floors up from the street-level din of 7th Avenue, the clink of barber shears and murmured conversation filled a modest hotel barbershop. Then, in a flash, everything changed. Two men in fedoras stepped inside the Park Sheraton Hotel's barbershop and unleashed a storm of bullets that would end one of the most violent and fearsome careers in American criminal history. The victim, Albert Anastasia, the so-called Lord High Executioner, boss of one of New York's 5 families, and the founding architect of Murder Incorporated. His life had been a study in controlled chaos, rising from the Brooklyn docks to the summit of Mafia power through a combination of brute force, sharp instincts, and sheer terror. Yet his death was swift, clinical, and carried out in a place where men typically go to relax. It was not just a hit, it was a message, and nobody ever officially claimed responsibility. Over half a century later, the murder of Albert Anastasia remains one of the boldest and most puzzling gangland assassinations in American history. Who planned it? Who pulled the trigger? And why was the most feared killer in organized crime left so exposed? Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we retrace the violent rise and sudden fall of Albert Anastasia and uncover what most likely happened. Albert Anastasia was born Umberto Anastasio in the Italian region of Calabria in 1902. He was one of 9 children in a poor family. Like many young men from southern Italy in the early 20th century, he sought opportunity elsewhere. In 1919, he slipped into the United States as a stowaway and began working on the Brooklyn waterfront. He was 17 years old. The docks were brutal, and Anastasia's reputation was forged quickly. In 1921, at the age of 19, he was convicted of murdering a fellow longshoreman. He was sentenced to death, but after a retrial, the conviction was overturned. Key witnesses had changed their stories. The case collapsed, and Anastasia walked free. Years later, rumors would suggest this was his first demonstration of quiet influence. But no proof ever surfaced. Officially, it was a legal technicality. He returned to the waterfront and picked up where he left off. By the late 1920s, the criminal underworld in New York was undergoing a violent transformation. Prohibition had created a lucrative black market, and gang alliances were shifting. Anastasia aligned himself with Charles "Lucky" Luciano, a rising force in the city's Mafia. In 1931, Luciano orchestrated the murder of Joe Masseria, one of the last bosses of the old guard. Anastasia was reportedly part of the hit team. The power vacuum that followed led to the formation of the 5 families, and a syndicate structure that would define organized crime in America for decades. Anastasia was given control over labor rackets on the Brooklyn docks under Vincent Mangano, one of the newly recognized bosses. In the 1930s and early 1940s, Anastasia was deeply involved with what became known as Murder Incorporated, a network of contract killers used by the Mafia to enforce discipline and eliminate rivals. Although he never admitted to leading it, later testimonies from informants and investigators would describe Anastasia as a key figure in the group. At the time, he remained largely in the shadows, avoiding publicity and arrest. During World War II, in a surprising turn, Anastasia joined the US Army. He served honorably and was even naturalized as a citizen. After the war, he returned to New York and resumed his criminal activities. But this time, his ambitions were higher. In 1951, his longtime boss, Vincent Mangano, disappeared. Mangano's brother was found shot to death. No charges were ever filed, and the bodies of the plotters, if any existed, were never found. Anastasia took over the family. With the support of Frank Costello, Another powerful figure in the national syndicate, his new position was confirmed by the commission. As boss, Anastasia was both feared and unpredictable. He maintained his grip on the docks and expanded into other rackets. He was known to take a personal interest in discipline and often reacted violently to perceived disloyalty or disrespect. In one notable case, Arnold Schuster, a young man from Brooklyn, was murdered shortly after appearing on television to describe how he had helped police catch a fugitive. The killing drew widespread media attention, and while Anastasia was never charged, his name began to circulate in connection to the crime. Internally, concerns began to grow. Anastasia's actions were said to attract unwanted attention. He made enemies, and his volatility was increasingly seen as a liability. One of those closest to him was his underboss, Carlo Gambino, a quieter figure known for his discretion and patience. By 1957, the internal politics of the Mafia were shifting again. Vito Genovese, another powerful boss, had ambitions to take over Costello's position as head of his family. In May of that year, Costello survived an assassination attempt and stepped down soon after. Anastasia, who had been a long-time ally of Costello, was said to be furious. He reportedly raised accusations and tensions, and for a time there were fears of a broader conflict. Later that year, according to some accounts, a meeting was held to calm the situation. Several bosses attended. Accusations were exchanged. At the end of the night, a symbolic embrace signaled that hostilities were being set aside. The crisis, at least on the surface, was over. In the months that followed, Anastasia appeared to lower his guard. He spent more time attending to business interests outside New York, including ventures in Florida and Cuba. According to accounts from the period, he began making public appearances without the layers of security he was once known for. On the morning of October 25, 1957, Anastasia arrived at the Park Sheraton Hotel on 7th Avenue in Manhattan. Inside the hotel was a barbershop called Grasso's. Anastasia was a regular there, but typically took precautions. That day, he entered with Vincent Squilanti, a protégé, and took chair number 4. He leaned back for a hot towel shave. His driver, Anthony Coppola, had dropped him off and left to park the car. He did not return. At approximately 10:15 a.m., 2 men entered the hotel. They were dressed in dark suits, scarves, sunglasses, and fedoras. Their faces were mostly covered. They walked directly into the barbershop and moved past a small partition separating the main room from the chairs. One of the men pointed a gun at the barber, pushing him out of the way. The other raised a weapon toward Anastasia. In seconds, shots were fired. Witnesses later described 5 or 6 gunshots. Anastasia stood up, apparently disoriented, and staggered forward. Some reports said he lunged toward a mirror, striking at it. The gunman continued firing. Anastasia fell to the floor and died there, surrounded by towels and broken glass. The attackers left the way they came, quickly and without harming anyone else. Squilanti was untouched. The barbershop was in chaos. Customers ducked for cover. A manicurist screamed. Within minutes, police arrived. Television journalist Gabe Pressman was one of the first reporters on the scene. He later described a surreal sight. The most feared gangster in New York sprawled across a barbershop floor, shot dead in broad daylight. Not long after, Anthony "Tough Tony" Anastasio, Albert's brother, arrived and reportedly broke down at the site. NYPD Chief of Detectives James "Lefty" Leggett told reporters somebody didn't like him and offered little more. Witnesses had seen only fragments. No clear description. No getaway vehicle found. No arrests. Within days, the leadership of Anastasia's crime family passed to Carlo Gambino. No internal war broke out. No revenge killings followed. 2 weeks later, over 50 Mafia figures were detained at the now infamous Appalachian meeting in upstate New York, a summit that law enforcement claimed was part of a broader plan to recognize national leadership. Albert Anastasia had been gunned down in a crowded city, mid-morning, surrounded by witnesses. But no one was ever charged. His killers disappeared without a trace. And the question that's lingered ever since remains unanswered. Who ordered the death of the executioner? The murder of Albert Anastasia was not a crime of passion, nor the act of an outsider. From the moment the news broke, the consensus, in law enforcement and the underworld alike, was that this was a professional hit. But who ordered it, and who pulled the trigger, has remained a subject of intense speculation for decades. No one was ever charged, and the names of possible shooters and conspirators have shifted depending on who was telling the story, and when. Over time, several main theories have emerged. Each points to different players and different motivations. Theory 1. The Gallo crew took the contract. One of the earliest and most widely circulated stories pins the hit on Joseph "Crazy Joe" Gallo and his brothers Larry and Albert, a trio of ambitious young mobsters from Brooklyn operating under boss Joe Profaci. According to several accounts, Profaci was closely aligned with Carlo Gambino and may have passed along the request to have Anastasia eliminated. Gallo, eager to prove himself, allegedly accepted. A barroom brag attributed to Gallo years later became part of the law. A police informant claimed Gallo boasted, "From now on you can just call the 5 of us the barbershop quintet." The comment suggested a 5-man hit team had carried out the execution, tying neatly to the 5 bullets found in Anastasia's body. For years, this quip was cited in books and media as circumstantial evidence, but serious doubts have emerged over time. Gallo was known as a compulsive exaggerator. Mob historian Selwyn Rabb later wrote that Gallo's alleged involvement was bravado more than fact. At just 29 and relatively low in rank, Gallo would have had no authority to kill a boss, not without high-level permission. If his crew participated, it's likely they were subcontracted by more powerful figures. And despite the swagger, the Gallos did not gain significantly in standing after the murder. There were no promotions, no sudden rise in power. If they'd carried out one of the most consequential hits in Mafia history, it didn't seem to benefit them. Theory 2. Carmine the Snake Persico did it himself. Another theory puts Carmine Persico at the center of the killing. Not as an organizer, but as one of the shooters. Persico, then a 23-year-old enforcer, also connected to the Profaci family, allegedly took credit years later during a prison conversation. By the time he made the claim, Persico had become boss of the Colombo crime family, and Gallo was long dead. But this version has even less credibility than the Gallo story. Persico's alleged confession came decades after the fact, in a context where no one could confirm or deny it. There's no contemporary evidence linking him to the hit. No eyewitnesses, no wiretaps, no mentions in police files. For many Mafia historians, Persico's claim was likely self-promotional, part of a pattern among aging mobsters, staking out legacy through retrospective myth-making. As mob researcher Christian Cipollini put it, by the 1980s everybody wanted credit for the Anastasia hit. It had become legend, and legends attract storytellers. Theory 3. Gambino used his own crew. A more recent and increasingly accepted theory suggests that Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's underboss and eventual successor, didn't rely on outsiders at all, but instead turned to trusted men from within his own faction. Journalist Jerry Capacci, who has covered the Mafia for decades, reported that Gambino had the hit carried out by 3 low-profile mobsters tied to drug trafficking. Stephen Armone, Stephen Gramauta, and Arnold Wittenberg. These men, relatively unknown to law enforcement at the time, would have been ideal for a job that required both skill and secrecy. According to this theory, Joseph Biondo, one of Gambino's key lieutenants, helped coordinate the logistics. After Anastasia's death, Biondo was promoted to underboss, a detail some believe was a reward for loyalty and discretion. Meanwhile, Gramauto quietly rose through the ranks and died of old age decades later, never charged or even officially questioned in connection with the murder. This version of events has gained traction largely because it fits the aftermath. Gambino took over immediately with no resistance. The killers vanished without trace, and no one inside the family ever made a move for revenge. Still, this theory relies mostly on informant statements and retrospective reporting. There is no physical evidence, no direct admissions, and as always in Mafia lore, the cleanest explanations are the hardest to verify. The murder of Albert Anastasia was not an act of personal vengeance, nor a case of mistaken identity. It was a high-level, premeditated removal, carried out with precision, supported by silence, and followed by immediate shifts in power. The most likely explanation is also the simplest. Carlo Gambino, with the tacit or explicit approval of Vito Genovese, orchestrated the assassination from within. It was an internal coup. Motive, means, and opportunity all point directly to Gambino. The motive was clear. As Anastasia's underboss, Gambino stood next in line. He had watched for years as his boss's violent unpredictability began to alienate others. The Schuster murder, especially, had drawn criticism from inside the Mafia. A killing seen as reckless, unnecessary, and inviting law enforcement scrutiny. Gambino later described Anastasia as a threat to the syndicate. Whether that statement was sincere or strategic hardly matters. It echoed the sentiment among other bosses that Anastasia was becoming a liability. And beyond the concerns about violence, there was raw ambition. By 1957, Gambino was well positioned to take control, but only if Anastasia was removed. That same year, Genovese had already forced out Frank Costello, a close ally of Anastasia. If Gambino and Genovese aligned, removing Anastasia would complete the shift in power, and that's what seems to have happened. In terms of means, Gambino didn't need to go outside the family. According to detailed reporting by journalist Jerry Capecci, he had access to a quiet, competent hit team. Armone, Gramauta, and Wittenberg, men deeply involved in narcotics, loyal to Gambino, and invisible to police. This insulated the operation from outside exposure. No need to involve the unpredictable Gallo crew or a third-party family like Profaci's. The fewer people involved, the lower the risk. Consider the aftermath. Joseph Biondo, who allegedly helped coordinate the logistics, was immediately promoted to underboss. Gramauta would go on to serve in the family for decades. No arrests, no leaks, no retaliation. A clean hit, followed by seamless succession. A hallmark of a sanctioned Mafia action. Even the setup points to inside coordination. Anastasia was killed in a moment of rare vulnerability, mid-morning, without protection, eyes closed in a barbershop chair. His driver, Anthony Coppola, dropped him off and then vanished. His protege, Vincent Squilanti, was in the next chair and wasn't touched. These details don't feel accidental. If the hit had come from outside, the logistics would have been far harder to arrange. Gambino, as his underboss, was in the perfect position to know his routine, schedule the meeting, and ensure the right people weren't there. The commission's silence also speaks volumes. After the hit, no internal war broke out. The Appalachian meeting, held just weeks later, was seen by many as a confirmation of the new order. If Anastasia had been killed without approval, someone would have had to answer for it. No one did. Even those close to the events understood the likely source. Former boss Joseph Bonanno, writing years later, described Anastasia's death as an internal adjustment. NYPD detectives at the time suspected Gambino but lacked evidence. Mob insiders never said it outright, but no one challenged the new leadership. It's also worth noting what didn't happen. There was no mourning period within the family, no pushback from Anastasia's loyalists, no grand funerals or vendettas. That kind of quiet acceptance only happens when the message is clear. This was sanctioned. In the world of organized crime, hierarchy is sacred, but pragmatism trumps loyalty. Anastasia's own rise, marked by the disappearances of the Mangano brothers, had followed the same logic. By 1957, that same logic had circled back to him. He had become too visible, too erratic, and in a world built on control, that was the final offense. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.